Shall we continue in the Gemora?
Yeah.
Yes.
Seches Beitza, Daf Lamed, Amid Aleph, 30a as they say. And we could start the new section if that's what people would like. So it's approximately 15 lines from the bottom. Maschilim ba'aremas hatevin. The Mishnah said that we are allowed to begin piling up straw on Yom Tov, and Rashi says that seems to indicate that there's no problem of muktzah. And Rashi also promised us that we would have problems when the Gemora finally deals with it, trying to adjust this part where there seems to be no problem with muktzah to the next part which seems to say there is a problem with muktzah. So perhaps this is probably where the Gemora is going to discuss it, because I see on the Amud base is already a new Mishnah. So let's see what we have in store for us here.
Okay.
Who would like to begin?
I'd love to begin.
Go ahead.
Matchil arumat hatevin.
No, I wouldn't pronounce it that way.
Armat.
First of all, matchilin.
Matchilim. Armat.
Aremat.
Aremat. Hatevin.
Mm-hmm.
We can begin to pile up a stack of hay. Straw.
Correct.
So, Amarav Kala, Zot Omeret Matchilin. Otsar. So these words in the Mishnah, at the beginning, the Otsar.
No. Zot Omeret is a way of introducing a halacha which seems to be predicated on the Mishnah. So it's as if to say, our Mishnah seems to be saying that this is the halacha. By saying we can start the pile, it seems to be saying that in general we're allowed to begin what's called an otsar. Okay, whatever that means, but that is the idea of zos omeres. Whenever the Gemora says zos omeres, it usually means our Mishnah, which is feminine, zos, by saying what we just quoted, seems to be implying a bigger generality, a bigger rule. So, as if to say, the two go together.
I'm not sure I understand it. Zos omeres is referring to the Mishnah.
Whenever the Gemara says zos omeres, it's like saying, we see that the Mishnah is saying A that implies B. So our Mishnah is really saying B, not just A, but it's saying B as well. If the Mishnah is making statement A, which implies statement B, then it's as if the Mishnah is making statement B as well. That's what the Gemara is saying.
It's a diuk?
It's like a diuk, but it's more of a logical connection that seems to be logically connected. These two concepts seem to be logically connected. Whatever the Mishnah said, Maschilim ba'aremas hatevin, we can start piling up the straw, would seem to imply a larger concept that we're allowed to actually start a storage house. An otsar is a storage house. What the connection is, we'd have to wait for Rashi to say exactly what the connection was. But let's just start with the Rashi. Okay, so we'll read the Rashi. There's three sized lines in Rashi. Very short lines, the mid-sized lines, and the longer lines. This is the mid-sized line. Second mid-sized line in Rashi, Ba'otzar.
Otsar.
You have it, Shabbatai?
Yes.
Okay.
B'davar ha'otsar.
No, Atzur.
B'davar ha'atzur. Something that's what does ha'atzur mean?
Okay. Well, the word otsar, you know what it is?
It's a storage area.
So this is the passive form.
To be stored.
Something that was stored up.
Was stored. Was stored. Shemaya muktzah la'otzar. It was muktzah la'otzar, but when it was stored.
Well, it was muksa, which we know the word muksa can mean like a halachic muksa, where we say you can't use it on Shabbos or Yom Tov, or the idea of muksa that we've had in the Mishnah. Even it talked about the word muksa as being a place that had been set aside, like pushed off to the side. Okay, so let's say designated. Let's just use the word designated now. Haya muktzeh, it was designated or pushed off to the side.
Outside for storage.
Right, for its storage.
It's storage.
Otzro. So it's a thing which could be stored, and sounds like it was stored away in its own storage house.
Zman aruch.
Which means?
For a long time.
Right. Now Rashi spoke about that in the Mishnah. If you remember Rashi in the Mishnah, he stressed that idea as well. That sometimes things are put into storage for long periods of time, as if to say, I don't need this for a long time, I don't want to use this for a long time, and therefore in the meantime, it's basically something that's not in his mind to use. So Rashi says that sounds like what we're talking about here, something that was stored away in its like designated area for a long period of time.
This word, what's is it a modern Hebrew word?
Yeah, I mean, there's even a minister called Sar HaOtzar.
So, yeah.
You know what that guy does?
List of storage.
But the storage of which you probably would be interested, called the treasury. The treasury.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The minister of the treasury. That's a special kind of storage, right?
Mm-hmm. Is this the
In most yeshivas they have something called Otzar HaSfarim. Have you ever heard of that?
Storage house books.
Which we call in English a library. But it's
Or
based,
Safriya is another.
excuse me?
Safriya.
Sifriya is another way to
Is
discuss
this the
it.
word that's used
Most
in the
yeshivas have a place called Otzar HaSfarim, like where all the books are stored away, and it's basically like a library.
Is this the word that Yosef used for warehouses?
In the parsha where he says he's
Yeah.
going to store things up, I'm not sure if this would be the word that was used in the Chumash. You can look it up. You can get a Chumash Bereshis. You want Sruli to pass you one?
It'll take a while.
Is that worthwhile or not?
I don't know how that.
You're not holding me up.
I don't
I'm not.
put up
I'm
this
not.
exciting Rashi, so
Excuse me?
I'll look at it later.
Homework.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Email.
Right. So far Rashi's saying that it seems like we're talking about a thing which, as he described adequately in the Mishnah as well, that it's a thing which was set aside, sort of pushed off away from normal usage for storage. Okay. And Rashi continues.
Kahai Gardner like this case.
Which would be what? What case are we talking about?
The case of...
We're quoting a line in the Mishnah. This all derived from the line in the Mishnah. Remember which line in the Mishnah we're... So we're talking about a subject of... Tevin. Straw. And it sounds like even an arema is more to the point. Right? A pile of hay is something you would store away. So this seems to be something which would be prone to be stored away. That's what Rosh seems to be saying. Or at least the Gemora is assuming that. In other words, the Gemora made an assumption. This part of the Mishnah seems to be allowing you to do a general thing, to store something away. By telling you can pile it up, it's also, to some extent, telling you you're allowed to store it. So Rashi is saying that's the case, that the Gemora is assuming that our case is like that. Why?
the stammer oitzrin oisol behema. Because the only condition we assume, right, with that we
Stama, that's right. The stama sort of means like the norm. The normal case where you haven't specified anything. Stam means without specification, without any further specification, just an assumption, a normal case where it's just assumed that the normal case will be.
They store it for the animal.
Right. That's generally speaking, I guess, what a person does who has an animal to feed. He stores away in a special storage house all of the hay and all of the straw, whatever that will be for the behemoth. Right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting because in the Mishnah, I think Rashi mentioned Tevin had two purposes, for heating and for feeding. When we got to this part of the Mishnah, when we're talking about piling it up, Rashi at the top of the page, if you look at the very first Rashi on the top here, Rashi mentions only one of the two usages. I remember Shabbatai had a long dissertation on this. Why does Rashi only talk about one of them? And I had my ideas that perhaps this was the Iker usage, was for heating the houses, etc. Rashi over here is saying that the Gemora is assuming it's more for the case of storing it away for the animal. I'm not sure why we sometimes pick on one of the two usages and sometimes the other. Perhaps that is part of the way that the Gemora is shifting its opinion, that maybe now we're looking at it more so as an animal food that gets stored away. I don't know if it would be any different if we're talking about the other usage for heating. Perhaps that also is something that people store away. I can see very much that, at least during the summer, people could store it away for the winter. And
wood and coal, wood and coal, that straw.
Again, I'm not sure why, but it possibly is like kindling. That whenever you talk about a fire, unless it's a place where a fire is constantly burning, which it brings to mind the famous case in the Gemora, which Mishnah speaks about, but it's really a Gemora that says there's something called Avak Lashon Hora, right? That it could go either way. When you say something about someone that's not definitely bad, but not definitely good either, it really depends on how you say it. Rashi, the Chazal, the sages, have a case which they say is so and so always has a fire burning in his house. So they say that could go either way. Either that means he's always doing chesed, he's always having people over, so he always has a fire burning in his house for achnasas orchim, or basically he's always pressing. He's always the guy never stops eating. He always has a fire in his house. So I don't know. So it could be that both are possible usages. In any event, okay, let's just try to follow the train of thought of the Gemora. So the Gemora thought that if we see the Mishnah saying you're allowed to pile up tevin, really, in a sense, it's like saying you're allowed to start storing stuff away. That's what it seemed to be saying. We can start an otsar, which means we can start to pile things up and store them away. Because the Rashi says that's what it seems like tevin is. Tevin is something you would want to store it away for a while, and therefore if it says you can pile it up, it's like saying you can start to store it away as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, I can see the assumption, I can see the connection. Then the Gemora says, this is all towards an end, towards a purpose. The Gemora is trying to prove something here, which we haven't seen what's really coming up yet. But the Gemora, let's go back to the Gemora now.
Let's see. Tehillah.
No, that's the end of the phrase. Maschili Zosomeris, this Mishnah tells us that there must be a rule, like an allowance from our Mishnah, that you would be allowed to be maschilin ba'otzar techila. You can even start storing things up.
So, Mani Rav Shimon.
Yeah, it's like this question and answer, so you have to make it a little bit more pronounced. Mani.
Who's the man? Who
should this be attributed to? In other words, we're stepping into a controversy here. we didn't realize it, but as Rashi mentioned in the Mishnah, there seems to be something implied about muksa. You're allowing people to handle muksa, because it's something you're going to store away for a long time, it's something that's not something you really want to use. Something you really don't want to use normally is looked at as muksa. But if this Mishnah is letting you do it, that because it seems to be very lenient with muksa. So manhi, who is that? Who could be the author of such a Mishnah where we seem to be very makel with muksa? We're already alerted by Rashi in the Mishnah that this is really what the Gemora is up to.
So it's Rabbi Shimon.
So the Gemora assumes Rabbi Shimon as Rashi had. Right?
Well,
Rashi's already, no, you've jumped a bit maybe. You've jumped perhaps down.
Oh, right.
We're just towards the beginning of the Gemara. The first time it says Mani, it says Rabbi Shimon it seems to be the apparent answer, which Rashi had already prepared us for. Rabbi Shimon, we already know Rabbi Shimon from Daf Beis Amud Aleph, when Rashi brought him down as being the one who doesn't hold a muksa. And so that's what the Gemara immediately says. It's the Rabbi Shimon that we've come to know and love.
He doesn't hold a muksa.
Doesn't hold a muksa. Because he allows us to handle the tevin, which is a thing you store away, which isn't really normally used from day to day, except as something stored away and not really utilizable.
Ema Sefer. And this was in the Sefer
No. This is a way, like Rashi said in the Mishnah, we're about to set up a contradiction. The Reisha, which we just quoted, seems to imply that we hold like Rabbi Shimon, or that this Mishnah is written by Rabbi Shimon, who doesn't hold a muksa. But, Ema Seifa, allow me to say over the Seifa now, as a contrast to that, and you'll see there's a glaring contradiction in the Mishnah.
Right. Well, law about 18, Shiva Mukta. But not regarding wood, it's stored away in the wood court.
Right,
wood
and the implied verb is, we're not allowed to pile up wood, which has been put into the muktzah, which is a storage area, Rashi said in the Mishnah, which is way off in the back of the building and not used for a long period of time. Again, a storage place. So that's like saying that what? Sa'an or ata'an, which means this brings us, this statement that you can't pile up wood seems to bring us where? To a position which is reminiscent of Rabbi Yehuda, who does hold there's a problem of muksa, and that's why he would tell you can't pile up the wood. So the one who told me you can pile up the straw would seem to be Rabbi Shimon, who doesn't hold that there's a problem of muksa. There should be muksa if you hold a muksa, but he doesn't hold a muksa, obviously. But yet it turns around within one space of one sentence, it's saying the opposite, that you can't handle things which should be muksa. It looks like someone who does hold there's a problem of muksa. So if we want to take the example that we're more familiar with at the beginning, that Rashi brought us from the Masechah Shabbos, right, the famous Moser Shemen Shebener. Do you remember that case, Ruli?
Yes, oil that started before Shabbos, and it can you use the oil that's left over?
Correct.
Once you're ready, you can't, when you're shimming it down.
Right. So then in this, if we use that case as being like the prime case where they argue, it's as if this statement in our Mishnah would be saying, you can use the shemen that's left over, but you can't use the shemen that's left over. It's like in the middle of the sentence it turned around and presented the opposite opinion. So that's, right, if we had a person who was telling us both of those things, we would think the person was either schizophrenic or had serious mental problems, right? But in a Mishnah, what's it doing in a Mishnah? How can you present two contrary positions, one after the other? Whoever said the first part seems to be saying the second part. That's very strange for the Mishnah to switch so suddenly to the other position. Either our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Shimon, in which case we should allow all forms of muksa to be used, or it's going like Rabbi Yehuda, in which case we would understand if you forbade all forms of muksa. So what is really going on as Rashi already promised us in the Mishnah, we're now up against a wall. Now we're in trouble because the Mishnah seems to have what? A contradiction between what it's calling the Resha and the Seifa, which is really just the first half of the sentence and the second half of the sentence.
Contradiction between Resha and
We have one long sentence. You're allowed to start a Remus Teven, but you're not allowed to start a Remus Eitzin Shabamuksa. So, whoever made the first half of the statement seems to be the second person making the second part of the statement. So, what is it?
There was an explanation for the word. You see, it's a place you never go into, or seldom go into, seldom come out from. It's a...
Okay,
Yeah.
that was true, but you see from our Gemora, the Gemora is equating that to the Teven, saying Teven is also such an item which is stored away for long periods of time, as we saw in Rashi just now. And therefore, essentially, it's the same as the wood. That's how Rashi and the Mishnah presented it. That's what the Gemora now seems to be saying, that we, of course, we're open for an answer to avoid the contradiction. We'd be very happy if someone would come along and say, no, we misunderstood something. But right now, we're understanding them to be very similar in principle, things which are stored away for long periods of time and therefore should not be considered an easily used item on Yom Tov. Anything that's not easily used, that's not readily used, should be considered muksa.
So does Rashi change his mind here, or what is he doing here?
He's explaining the Gemora.
The
The
first
Gemora,
is-
you know, Rashi in the Mishnah, if we can go back and read Rashi in the Mishnah. Rashi in the Mishnah already promised us the Gemora is going to ask the contradiction. Rashi did not answer the contradiction. He promised us that the Gemora will ask the contradiction. Rashi set us up for this. Rashi did not answer it in the Mishnah. He did not. He would be out of place for Rashi to do it, in fact, because the Gemora is going to ask a contradiction. Rashi's not going to answer it. What business would he have doing that? That's not Rashi's job. Rashi's job is to be a mafarish, to explain what's in front of us. So very often Rashi only explains the Mishnah, doesn't even hint to what's in the Gemora. But in this case, he did both. He explained the Mishnah, and then he said the Gemora is going to ask a serious question. We just saw the question. Now Rashi just following through, just like the Gemora is following through and saying it is a serious question. They are really contradicting each other, at least on the surface. Maybe somebody's going to explain now that they won't, but until now, Rashi in the Mishnah and the Gemora now as well is very consistent. Tevin and Eitzin should both be considered muksa, theoretically. The only reason why it seems like the first part of the Mishnah is saying you can pile up Tevin, and the second part is saying you can't pile up wood, is not because Tevin and wood are different. They're essentially the same.
Just a term used for animals. It's not Rashi is told for animals.
Well, Rashi has told us a few things so far. We've seen Rashi say it's really for both.
Both
Both for fire and for behema. Okay, but right now we're looking at it as something for a behema. In the Mishnah, Rashi mentioned it's for burning. He didn't say that makes it different. Rashi in the Mishnah did not say that because it's for burning, that explains why it's not muksa. No, Rashi said it should have been muksa. In the Mishnah, where he was talking about using it for burning and didn't mention the idea, he did earlier in the Mishnah, but not at this point in the Mishnah. He did not mention the fact that it's used for feeding animals. And Rashi said it should be a contradiction. If you hold that there's a problem muksa, they should have both been a problem. If you hold there's no problem muksa, then they both should not have been a problem.
Can't have one's a problem, not one's a problem.
They're both essentially the same. There's things that are stored away for long periods of time. Now we saw the same idea in the Rashi and here in the Mishnah, in the Gemora, as what Rashi was implying in the Mishnah. These are things which should have been considered muksa. Rashi actually said a slightly different reason in the Mishnah. He said he had not prepared it, and also he's not used to using it. So perhaps you could say, maybe that's the answer. It's normally stored away for a behema. Sometimes people use it for burning. Now he'd like to use it for burning. But Rashi said in the Mishnah that's not the norm. The norm is to store it away like our Gemora is saying now for Behema. So if it's something that's normally stored away and not normally used for burning, and he didn't prepare it for burning and doesn't normally use it for burning, rather, like it's saying now, he normally stores it away for the animals and not to be used day to day. So then, just like the wood, which is stored in the way back, this also should be considered muksa.
So Tibbin should be muksa.
It should be muksa. That's what Rosh said in the Mishnah. This should have been considered muksa. It's not something you normally use. Why does the Mishnah say you're allowed to handle it, you're allowed to pile it up? It must be this part of the Mishnah doesn't hold that there is any problem with something that we normally call muksa. Just like Moshe Shemin Shabbaner. And yet the second half of the statement seems to hold that there's a problem with muksa. It's not allowed to handle the wood. Why not? Must be hold there is a problem with muksa.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the exact contradiction that Rashi promised us. And so here we've hit it head on, and now we need someone to bail us out. We need someone to explain why perhaps it's not a contradiction. So the Gemora goes on to attempt an answer that what?
Achi.
Hacha.
Here, Arze.
Arze.
It's a kind of Arze.
Erez is a cedar tree, right? Arze Levanon. Erez Balvanon Giske Shisulim. Right?
What do you call it?
Erez is a cedar tree. Tall cedar tree. So now I don't know. I was never a proficient scout, Boy Scout. So I never really got to the point where I knew the different qualities of the different kinds of wood, and which is a better kindling, which is not the better kindling. But after this Gemora, we should be a little bit more knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
Gemora says, we're talking about Arzei
And some other one. Ish or
Vashuchi.
It's another kind of a wood, right? That's okay.
I suppose so. Siach is a bush. Maybe it's Asuchi. Not sure. There's no real Rashi that, there is. Rashi says this next line tells you what Asuchi is, or Ashuchi. Look at the beginning of the next line in the Rashi. I'm skipping one Rashi for the first moment, just to get a...
Asuchim means Erez Nekava.
Right.
Female tree.
So it is a female cedar tree. So I guess Erez is a male cedar tree, and Shuchi is a female cedar tree. Basically, I don't know if it makes a difference, but both types of cedar wood. Apparently they're a bit different, the male and the female, but they're essentially cedar.
So, why is he saying this?
We're trying to set up a situation where it will make sense why he permitted straw but didn't permit the wood. It's a special kind of wood. That's how we normally get out of a question, by saying, oh, it's not the normal case. The reason why it seems like contradiction is because it's talking about a different, weird case. Okay, now let's go back to the previous Rashi. Okay. Erez Vashuche.
Erez Vashuche means a cedar tree. Vashuche means what?
A feminine cedar tree.
Feminine.
Basically, two types of cedar wood. Let's just assume they're both pretty similar right now.
Ein other masik oisa. Person cannot masik oisa. Remove them.
No, look at the top Rashi, very top of the page. Look at the top of the page.
Oh, it's
Rashi
a
said,
burn.
right. So this is the verb. To be masik is to burn the wood for heating. Right? So what's Rashi saying?
Person can't burn the wood.
Not can't.
A person
Doesn't.
burn them for heating. The Ma'idin, the binyan, because they are designated to be.
They're what?
They're designated for building.
Right. Designate is a stronger word. I would have just said they're standing, which means the normal use is, right? Something standing for a certain usage, it means that's like the normal usage. Okay? So what would you say? Cedar wood is not good for firewood?
It's not made. It's not made.
Why not?
Because it's made for building.
But does that mean it's not good for burning? If I put it in my fireplace, it won't create a nice fire?
Wood.
Wood. Excuse the pun. Wood. It would. But it's too good for that, right? In other words, it's really such special wood that people prefer
To use it for.
to keep it for a more expensive usage. Right? It's like certain things are too expensive, like a really nice napkin. Right? And then water spills. You just use your nice your really beautiful napkins to wipe up a spill.
No.
No, you get the crummy napkins for that. Or the crummy schmata for that. But you save the nice napkins for the more expensive usage that you bought it for. So these are like a very expensive usage, right? They take cedar wood. I believe, by the way, that's where one of the places you see that in Tanakh, you know where the cedar trees usually grow? Arze Lebanon, right? In Lebanon.
Yeah.
And you know when we got a hold of them, I think it says in Tanakh.
Took him to Egypt for the Beitza Mikdash.
No, that's another thing. That's not necessarily from Lebanon. That was Yaakov Avinu, who lived in Beersheba or Hebron or whatever, wherever. Let's say Beersheba. When he went down, he brought with him trees, perhaps the eras or whatever trees he brought, and he planted them in Egypt, and then they were kept down there for when they would leave. But Arze Lebanon, I believe in Tanakh, we see them used specifically for the Beis HaMikdash. I think that Shlomo had contracted the king of Lebanon to send a lot of workers and to cut them down, to send them down for the Beis HaMikdash.
I think they used the wood from Midian. It was grown in Midian.
Who did?
Midian for the Beitza
For the
Mikdash.
Beis HaMikdash or the tabernacle?
That's a good question. I think
Midian.
I'm talking about Shlomo HaMelech years later.
No. For the first one.
Tabernacle.
Tabernacle.
Okay.
Because it comes from the area of Stuas. It's the middle part that they use. So
Yeah, they use Atze Shittim, I think. It says Yaakov brought them down to Mitzrayim, and then they brought them out again. But they're called Atze Shittim. I don't know if it's Erez. I don't know if it's
But that's
Erez.
Shittim. Yeah.
But I remember that they talk about, I'm pretty sure they talk about Arze Lebanon as being chopped down by special workers in the time of Shlomo, and he's actually doing the Beis HaMikdash, which is more permanent than the tabernacle, and more expensive and more of a proper professional job.
So you use it for the beams in the roof?
For different parts of the Beis HaMikdash. I'm not sure exactly which parts, but... So that's what Rashi's saying. These are like very expensive beams of wood. They're used. You can create nice beams of wood. So like someone has a lumber yard, right? Someone has a lumber yard, and someone comes to him on Yom Tov and says, "Can you give me some lumber for some firewood?" What would he tell them? You're crazy. These are very expensive pieces of lumber. They're used for building. You want to just use them for firewood? That's ridiculous. It's like taking the most beautiful kind of a steak and feeding it to the dog. Would you take a very choice steak, filet mignon, one of the choicest pieces of meat?
No.
You give it to your dog? No, you give him horse meat, or you give him some the throwaway meat. So anyways, right? So firewood is basically the lowest of the kind of wood, right? You wouldn't use expensive wood.
Mahogany wood too. What's mahogany wood?
Yeah, mahogany is also very, they use it for furniture and so forth. So people aren't going to use that kind of wood for firewood. So that's what Rashi says, the Pshat in the Gemora. We're not talking about regular wood. Regular wood might not be muksa. Because, okay, we don't know whether we're going with Rabbi Shimon or Rabbi Yehuda exactly, but we are saying a statement. Our Mishnah is not talking about regular wood. Our Mishnah is talking about what? Very expensive wood that nobody would normally use for a fire. That's why it's muksa. because people don't normally use that kind of stuff for a fire. But wood that people would use for a fire, and therefore, even if they don't normally, but it's something people would use. People do use wood for a fire, right? As long as it's not too expensive. So then it might not be muksa. Okay, now does that mean we're going for Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Shimon? I don't know yet. But we're trying to make it that they don't contradict each other. We're trying to say that normally wood would be just like tevin, not muksa, because it has a bit of usage. Sounds like Rabbi Shimon to me, actually. Rabbi Shimon's the one who says, why does he not hold of muksa? Why does Rabbi Shimon not hold of muksa? Let's say Moser Shaman Shabanir. Why does he hold it's not muksa? Because it has a usage. It has a usage. You don't normally use it. You normally use it for burning, for creating flame. But right now that's gone, and now you could use it for, it has a usage. So Rabbi Shimon is very practical. He's a very practical guy. Right now you could use it for eating. That, and you could take the shemen that you normally use for lighting a fire and use it for eating. Then it shouldn't be considered muksa. It has a usage. But something that people really don't use, right? We call that muksa machmas chisaron kis. It's a whole different category of muksa. Something that's so expensive, nobody would. It's like a moel. A moel has a knife, okay, but it's extremely, like an extremely expensive knife. That's just for bris milah, right? And you go to the moel and say, look, we don't have enough knives for the table. Can we use your moel knife for the suda?
No.
What would he say to you? You're crazy. You're crazy. It's an expensive knife. One little nick and I have a problem with the bris milah. I can't mess around with this. So that's called muksa machmus chisaron kis. That's a whole different madrega of muksa. It's not the normal muksa. Normal muksa is something that people don't normally use, but it has a usage. So Rabbi Shimon said it has a usage, so use it. Rabbi Yehuda says no, people don't normally use it, so fine. But here we're saying the wood is something that's like.
So Rabbi Shimon holds that wood has a usage?
It has a usage. You could use it for firewood. Normal wood, not expensive wood. But this is so expensive. I think that's where the Gemora is going, in that direction. That even Rabbi Shimon will say it's muksa because it's not the normal muksa. It's a new kind of muksa called muksa machmus chisaron kis. It's a whole different kind of muksa that even Rabbi Shimon agrees that people are very makpid on certain expensive items and they don't want to use them for just anything.
So Mishnah includes a normal wood you'd ever use?
That's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like the Gemora is saying.
So the Mishnah means it says you can't use it wood.
Okay, let's just go back into the Gemora now. I jumped the gun a bit. Okay, so the Gemara says here we're dealing with a special kind of wood. Hacha, we're dealing with what? Be'arze v'shuchi, what? Askinan. That's what we're dealing with. A special kind of wood that's extremely expensive. And not normally, no one in their right mind would use it for firewood. Here we go. There we go. Baruch Hashem. Baruch Shekivanti.
It's costly, loss of money.
That's right. It's a muksa due to the fact that nobody wants to lose an enormous amount of money. Not the regular kind of muksa that just people don't tend to use it. So it's a whole different category. That category, afilu.
Rav Shimon, agrees.
He agrees that what?
Ika.
No. Maybe Ika Damasti is a new thing. Moda stands by itself. He agrees that what?
You don't use this one.
Right. In other words, it is muksa. In other words, when two people are arguing and then you say somebody's moda, they're moda to their opponent in what their opponent says, right? So Rabbi Shimon will be moda to whom? Rabbi Yehuda, right? We know that Rabbi Shimon argues with Rabbi Yehuda. So we're saying Rabbi Shimon will be moda. It means moda to Rabbi Yehuda. And moda in what Rabbi Yehuda says. What does the Rabbi Yehuda say? That something that people don't normally use is muksa. So normally Rabbi Shimon doesn't agree to that. So what they don't normally use it has a usage, and some people use it, it's okay. But here he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that this thing that's so expensive and to use it when you lose so much money, there he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that what? This item is muksa. because here he agrees that nobody would use it. Okay? So therefore our Mishnah is really, according to this pshat so far, what? Going according to Rabbi Shimon. That's why you can take the tevin and pile it up. Yes, it's something you don't normally use, but so what? Now you have a usage. And the same thing with regular wood, really. But why does the Mishnah say you can't pile up wood? Because it's not talking about normal wood, it's talking about wood. That's what? Special wood, very expensive wood. What's the example the Gemora gives of very expensive wood? Wood that comes from the Erez tree, wherever it grows. Maybe it grows elsewhere, not just Lebanon, but maybe it's a normal place to find it.
What about Canadian trees?
Where is expensive wood? Rashi said, what makes it expensive that people feel this lumber is very good for building? It's a whole different category of wood. Something's good for building. Maybe you're right. Maybe mahogany would be the same thing. Something that's everyone says it's good for furniture. So you wouldn't waste it on the fire. You wouldn't waste it on just normal burning.
No, in the Rhineland, for example, they're very good, strong wood.
I'm not an expert, so anything you say I'm willing to accept if you can back it up. But the point is, we don't need to know specific areas. We have to know the principle. The principle involved is expensive item. An expensive item, which we say could be a mole's knife as well, is an expensive item. That goes into a new category, not the regular muksa that we normally talk about. And that is a maklokus normally, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Huda, whether we allow you to use it or not. It's a whole new category of muksa that even Rabbi Shimon agrees should be considered muksa and off limits on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Why? Because here he feels nobody would use it. Nobody in their right mind would use it, unless it's like mamish an emergency, but that's so unusual that even Rabbi Shimon agrees it should be considered muksa. So it could be any kind of wood that falls into that category. Just like you said, a knife of a moil could fall into that category. Anything falls in that category that's so expensive, and people are so makpid not to break it, not to use it for normal things, right? There might be other things that go into that category for all I know. Many things. You can open up a muksa book now and look and see what other things are considered muksa machmus chisar and kis. But it's a whole new category. That's the point. That even Rabbi Shimon agrees is asur and is off limits on Shabbos and Yom Tov.
So first, it seemed like the problem between the Mishra and the Sefer.
Excuse me?
First, it seemed like the problem where there isn't a problem for the Mishra talking
We
about.
thought it was because if it's talking about normal wood, it seems like normal wood and tevin should be the same, whatever you're going to say they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're either both should be considered muksa, or they're both not muksa. They're both very similar items. So the Gemora thought that it's contradiction. Now we're saying it's not really contradiction because it's talking about a special kind of wood. But taka normal wood would be the same as tevin. You could be allowed to pile it up because the Mishnah is on like Rabbi Shimon. Any other rashes before we continue? The muksa masking chasaron kis ninhu.
The muktzah, because of Chasar Kis Nud. Shadamya, its price, the current is expensive. So value is expensive.
Right. The value of the money that they're worth is very expensive, right? So since they're so expensive and so valuable, people are very careful not to use them. Could be women have certain jewelry like that that's too expensive. They wouldn't wear it out on a normal day. They keep it in locked up in a vault, or they keep it in a special museum or something. Maybe that would be called also some keys. Okay, so that's one version of the teretz to the kasha. How come the Mishnah seems to be contradicting itself? That lets you pile up tevin but not pile up wood. What should be the difference? They both should be either yes muksa or not muksa. It's either going like Rabbi Shimon, it's going like Rabbi Huda. Let's decide. So that this version decided to go with Rabbi Shimon. Really, the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. That's why you can pile up tevin, and you really should be able to pile up wood as well, no matter where you store it, because it has a good usage. Rabbi Shimon is into practicality. If it has a usage, then use it. But the Gemora answers that the reason why our Mishnah forbade piling up wood is because it's talking about very expensive wood, which goes into a whole new category called muksa machmus chisar and kis. Now the Gemora is saying, Ika da Amri, I'm sorry, Ika da Masni la.
So was I?
Ik het de masmila that also that it's
No,
taught.
Ika there are.
That the mission taught.
No, that learn, this is a verb, that learn it on the Seifa.
In the second.
No, learn it is not clear what the it is, okay? But it will explain. It will explain. So everything we've talked about till now started with an observation about the Resha, right? If you look at the very beginning of this Amar of Kahana, etc., Zosomeris, it was all focused on the Resha. That if you can let me pile up Tevin, Zosomeris, this is teaching us a rule that blah, blah, blah. So it all started from the Resha, and then it evolved from there. But now some people learn it that Rav Kahana didn't focus on the Resha when he spoke of Zosomeris. He's focused on the Seifa when he spoke about a Zosomeris. Mm-hmm. And things evolved a little bit differently according to that version. The part of the Mishnah that says what?
But not the wood which is stored away.
Meaning the Mishnah forbade you from piling up muksa that was stored in the backyard or whatever, right? So on that part of the Mishnah, according to this version,
so Amar Rav Kahana, it's not a merit. And so this is what we said earlier.
No, he looked at the Resha and said a different Zosomeris. He said this is teaching us one rule, but he's now saying if you start with the Seifa, you end up with a different rule. You look at the Seifa and you say Zosomeris, this is teaching us that we're not allowed to start dealing with an otsar, things that normally get stored away, right? So this is seeming to go, what? Manhi, who is this, seemingly? The answer seems to be Rabbi Yehuda. This would seem to go like Rabbi Yehuda. So we're starting with the Seifa that forbade you to pile up wood and saying this seems to be going according to Rabbi Yehuda, that what? That he does hold a muksa, and that's why he's not letting you pile up normal wood. Normal wood that's stored in the backyard is typical muksa according to Rabbi Yehuda because it's something you don't really use very often, and therefore it's out of sight, out of mind, so to speak. And therefore he looks at those kind of things as being muksa. When Shabbos or Yom Tov came in, they were pushed away, so therefore you can't use them. And therefore that's why you can't pile up wood or deal with wood on Yom Tov. That kind of wood that's been stored in the backyard. But if we look at it from that point of view, we'll have a problem because what? Ema Resha. Now that we've said that rule that stems from the Seifa, let's say over.
It's a question, right?
This is now a question. If we end up with a rule like we just said from the Seifa, that it seems to be going like Rabbi Yehuda, who doesn't allow muksa, therefore he doesn't allow you to pile up the wood because it's muksa, it's something you stored away for a long period of time. But then let's now speak out the Resha and show how that's in contradistinction. Because if we say over the Resha that says what? Reimat, that we're allowed, according to that part of the Mishnah, that it says we're allowed what? To pile up straw. That looks like a ta'an that brings us over the Rebbe Shimon. That looks like we're now entering into a shita of Rebbe Shimon. Allowing us to pile up the Tevin looks like we've now been brought into another domain called Rebbe Shimon land. And he, what? Delayed. He what?
He doesn't hold it.
He doesn't hold a muksa. So that's what it looks like, that we're going from the last part of the Mishnah, it seems like going like Rabbi Yehuda, to the first part of that sentence where it seems to be going like Rabbi Shimon. So we've pretty much said the same contradiction, but instead of starting with the first statement, which allowed us to pile up tevin, and working our way over to the last statement, which didn't allow us to pile up wood, we just did it in the reverse order. We start with the seifa that didn't allow me to pile up the wood, and now we're asking that seems to contradict the first statement, which allowed me to pile up the tevin. So it looks like a very minor difference between these two versions. Just you're going to have a contradiction between A and B, so do you start with A and then say it's a contradiction to B, or do you start with B and say it's a contradiction to A? It doesn't seem like a big difference, but it's a minor difference, and the Gemora wants us to be aware that some people have on record that Rav Kana started with the very last statement and worked his way backwards, like in this version, or the first version which we had where he started with the first statement and worked his way forwards. Either way, he ends up with the same contradiction that we've spoken about in the past, which is that half of the statement seems to go like Rabbi Yehuda, and half of the statement seems to go like Rabbi Shimon. Something strange is going on.
Well, why make the point that you started this way rather than this way? What's
it seems minor. Seems minor, okay. But first of all, for the sake of truth, that has to be spoken out that we have a different version. I mean, I think it speaks well for the Gemora that it's so truthful. It even brings such a minor version just to show you there were two versions. Right? That's very truthful to speak out both versions. Who really cares? The truth of the matter is there will be a slight difference between the first version and the second version, because the first version is showing you Rabbi Shimon first, and then saying, but it contradicts the other. But it's starting with Rabbi Shimon. It's like putting him in the driver's seat and then showing you how the second statement is kind of is showing you that it contradicts. In a sense, it's emphasizing Rabbi Shimon and then showing you that something's adverse to that. Whereas the second version is the opposite. It's putting Rabbi Yehuda in the driver's seat first, and then showing you that the first statement is adverse to that.
And in the first part of the Gemora, is that putting Rabbi Shimon before?
That was putting Rabbi Shimon first.
Also first.
No, not also. What do you mean also?
No,
we never talked about Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda before. There wasn't an issue in the first part. That was the whole question of whether you let people do something that looks like chol, not like chol. It had nothing to do with muksa. But since we were talking about tevin and moving tevin, so we got into this subject. But it's like a tangential subject. The Mishnah really hadn't been dealing with this before. Okay, but in this part of the Mishnah, in the second version, we start with the last statement, which is like putting Rabbi Yehuda in the driver's seat, and then just pointing out that the first statement is adverse to that. So this version may end up going with that emphasis. The first one put Rabbi Shimon directly in the driver's seat and kept him in the driver's seat, right? Mm-hmm. If you think about it, the final maskana of the first version, by saying we're talking about very expensive wood, is keeping it Rabbi Shimon. So we put him in the driver's seat, we presented a problem, but we kept him in the driver's seat, even in the answer. Now this one's putting Rabbi Yehuda in the driver's seat, presenting a problem, and I imagine we're going to end up with keeping Rabbi Yehuda in the driver's seat. That's the difference between the first version and the second version. Seems very minor, but so if you start with assumption of A, this is going to like Rabbi Shimon, it's like we don't want to go far away from that. Even if we had a contradiction, but we'll fix it up. We'll fix it up to keep Rabbi Shimon in the driver's seat. The second one is putting Rabbi Yehuda in the driver's seat now, saying the Mishnah definitely looks like it's going like Rabbi Yehuda, but then we have a problem with the first statement. Oh, we'll fix that up. So it's all a matter of perspective, which you start with, and you end up fixing up the second statement as opposed to the first statement. Mm-hmm. So let's see what we end up with over here. So the problem seems to be very simple, contradiction, but slight difference of who you start assuming the Mishnah is going like. Just a second.
Over there.
Over there would mean in the first case.
Right.
The first case in the Mishnah where we said you're allowed to pile up tevin, even though you're not allowed to pile up wood, you're allowed to pile up tevin. You know why? Because we're talking about a special kind of tevin. It's the same kind of an answer as the first version, but this time we're not saying it's a special kind of wood. We're saying really the wood is a regular kind of wood. That's where Rabbi Yehuda doesn't let you pile it up. Why does he let you pile up the tevin? Because it's a special kind of tevin that even Rabbi Yehuda will let you pile up. What is that? Tevna saria.
It's not good.
Now, saria should mean that it's like rotting a bit, which I assume speaks to our first problem in the Mishnah, which you and I discussed.
So soy means rotting?
I think it does. I'll have to see in the Rashi just to make sure. I'll have to see in Rashi, but
This is why you burn it.
that's why you'd rather burn it,
Not feed it.
because the Rashi made it clear before. When you store it away, you're storing it away for the behemoth. And that's how Rashi in the Mishnah said, if you're burning it, that's not usual. The not usual use is to burn it. But now we're saying maybe if it's this kind of tevin, this kind of rotting, a bit of rot, it's started to rot a bit, so therefore you don't want to keep it for your behemoth either because it'll make your behemoth sick, or simply because it's not good for storing it away. It'll get much more rotten by storing it away. If it's already started to rot, it's going to get even worse by storing it away.
Doesn't that make it muksa?
No, that's the point. What's left to do? I'm not going to store it away for the behemoth, which is what made it muksa. Originally, if you look at the Rashi before, Rashi said that's why we consider it otsar. That's why we consider it muksa. Because it's something you would normally put aside for much longer periods of time and not for immediate usage. But burning is an immediate usage. So if the only thing that's left is an immediate usage, then it's no longer, even Rabbi Yehuda wouldn't consider it muksa, because the only thing that really made it muksa is that you're not really using it for immediate usage, you're storing it away for a much more far away usage. But if it's rotting, so then that would explain why you're not storing it away for your behemoth, and therefore the only usage. Now you see the beauty in the Rashi earlier in the Mishnah that said there are two usages for straw. Burning and behemoth. Except at that point, I made the statement based on the order of Rashi, that he put burning first, that I thought that was the more central usage. Now I'm retracting. I think you didn't agree with me even then, did you?
I never agree with you in anything.
I know.
No,
Just
no.
on principle.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how Torah has to be learned.
My mother
Right?
used to
You
call
need an
me-
opponent.
My mother called me Dafka. You're a Dafka.
Your mother knew. Mother knows best. But that gives you a good head for learning. Okay, so the point is now I'm much more aware of how these two options play one into the other. Now it's clear at the end of the Gemora that Rashi was brilliant in saying there's two usages. Why he put the one first, I can't yet say, because I would have thought you put the Iker usage first, and now I see burning is not the Iker usage, it's only something you do by default, really. Really, the Iker usage is to store it away for longer periods of time for the behemoth. But you do sometimes use it once in a while for burning as kindling, or maybe when you run out of wood, or who knows what. So then we say, but if it's already starting to rot, then there's only one usage left, because you're not going to store it away for long periods of time, because it'll just get more rotten. Plus, maybe you don't want to feed it to your behemoth when it's in that state. So the only thing left is for burning, and therefore even Rabbi Yehuda, who would normally say this would be considered a muksa, he'd have to admit this time what we said before, that Rabbi Shimon would have to admit that something should be, that the expensive wood would be muksa. Here it's the other way around. Rabbi Yehuda will have to admit that this kind of straw should be considered not muksa, because its only real usage is burning, and burning you're allowed to do on Yom Tov, so there's no reason to say it's muksa.
So the reason why the straw is non-muktzah because it's rotting, right? Therefore, it's no use to go.
That means it's only got one usage left. If it has two possible usage, and the one that you normally use it for is feeding the behemoth, you store it away for long periods of time for the behemoth, that was a reason to call it muksa, at least according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon even then didn't really consider that to be a reason to call it muksa, because it has a usage, has the other usage still. He didn't care that people normally store it away. But we're going in Rabbi Yehuda now. In Rabbi Yehuda's way of thinking, if people normally store something away for long periods of time, that's like not my normal usage, it's muksa, like off to the side, therefore it should be considered off limits. But here, where there's only one real purpose left, the purpose for burning, then there's no reason to consider it muksa, even according to Rabbi Yehuda. Let's see, maybe Rashi will say what I'm saying, then I'll feel vindicated. Demasni law, some people learn it. What's the it? Rashi provides the it. They learn what?
The Rav Kahana.
Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana came along and said Zosomeris, and he made a whole deal out of the Zosomeris. So this version would say that he said his Zosomeris on the part about the Eitzim. That the Eitzim looks like Rabbi Yehuda, who doesn't want you to use something that's normally used for an Otzer. Said the Gemora, but it's okay, because that doesn't contradict the Tevin. Why? Because it's a special kind of Tevin. It's a Tevin that even Rabbi Yehuda would say you can use. Why?
Tavna Syria.
So right away Rashi gives you the Caesarea is a Aramaic version of the word, right? But Rashi right away gives you the Hebrew version. Right? Rashi in a sense is like a Hebrew dictionary for a lot of these words. Right away he gives you the Hebrew version. What's the Hebrew version?
Nirkav.
Nirkav, which means
Decaying.
right, rotting. And he adds another word, which is probably where the word Saria comes from,
Masriach.
Masriach, which in modern Hebrew
Spoiled.
means smelly, like disgusting. If you listen to little children, you can learn Hebrew very well. Kids always scream, "Ata masriach," you stink, right? You hear them always. Kids always yell these horrible things at each other, but it's a very good way of learning Hebrew, even though it's kind of horrible to hear what kids say to each other. But then it'll always impress you what this word means, right? And sometimes they say about other things, right? Someone gives you some food, carrots or something that's very too healthy. What do kids say? It's masriach, right? You give a kid something he doesn't like. Even in modern English, we do the same thing. This stinks. This movie stinks. This book stinks. Use it like just a general for anything you don't like. So Rashi says that's probably where the word saria comes from, masriach. But stinking can be for a lot of reasons. But one of the main reasons why things stink is because they're rotting. So the real meaning is rotting. Okay, so what do we care if this tevin is rotting? How does that change the picture halachically? Rashi says. It's not what?
For the animals to eat it.
Right? You wouldn't feed it to your animal, right? Those people say, I wouldn't feed that to my dog. Right? People don't feed these things to their animals. They need to keep their animals healthy, right? And which means what? It's normal usage. Stam often means the normal, like without knowing anything to the contrary. The normal usage now that it isn't good for behemoth. Now the only thing left is for eitzim, is for burning. Below. I don't know what Rashi has to repeat that. He already said it's not fit for a behemoth, but he's just stressing, right? It's the only thing it's really fit for now. The only real usage it has left is for burning and not for eating. And therefore, no, he's not saying therefore. It's the opposite. Rashi's now saying when we've talked about otzer, Rashi's clarifying that. You know what we kept referring to when we talked about otzer? Achila. Tevin for achila is what we called la'otzer. As Rashi said earlier, when do you tend to store tevin away? When you're saving it for your behemoth down the line. So Rashi says now this is not for achila, which was hainu otzer, which was what we kept referring to as otzer. That's what Rashi means here. He's not trying to say this is for otzer. It's just the opposite. He's trying to say now, because it's now rotting and it's not for achila, which was what we always called otzer, this is not now for otzer. This is only for short-term burning. Okay, so now we understand what the Gemora did. It basically did the same thing as the first version, where we wanted everything to go like Rabbi Shimon. We had to create the eitzim to be a special kind of eitzim that even Rabbi Shimon would be moda is muksa.
So can you interpret that last line again?
What?
You said v'lo achila,
Yes.
v'hainu.
Yes, now he's saying, this is like a footnote. It's not for achila v'hainu, which is what we always meant as an otzer, as la otzer. which he's really already said earlier on, a few lines before. He said already that otzer was always for achilas behema. You put it away for a later eating of the behema. So what now that we've said it's only for burning and it's not for eating anymore, which is always what we called the otzer. So therefore it's not for otzer anymore. Once it's not for otzer, even though that's not clear from Rashi, that's what he's saying. If you look in the bottom, by the way, that little asterisk shows you another version that says lav le'otzer. It's not for otzer. That's what Rashi's trying to say. It's not for otzer anymore. But I could interpret it without going into that change and just say he's telling you what achila would have been. Achila would have been hainu otzer. It's always what we've been referring to as otzer. But you want to read the other version, that's fine as well. We get the idea of what Rashi's saying. Rashi's now explaining how this is a perfect answer for the Gemora. We wanted it to go like Rabbi Yehuda. The only thing that was preventing us from going like Rabbi Yehuda was why would he let you store the tevin? Why would he let you pile up the tevin? The answer is, it could still go like Rabbi Yehuda, who would be talking about what? A special kind of tevin. A special kind of tevin that has no usage anymore for storage. Therefore, the only usage that's remaining is the burning aspect, which is an immediate usage, which means, of course, you can use it on Yom Tov if it's for burning. That's what Yom Tov, that's what you do on Yom Tov. You burn, you cook, and so forth. So therefore, there would be no reason to say it's Asur on Yom Tov anymore. So that's very good to explain why you can't pile up normal wood, because normal wood is stored away in the back. That's what we're talking about. Eitzim Shabamuksa. That kind of wood that's stored in the back is already in an otzer. It's already in an otzer. So of course you can't use it, according to Rabbi Yehuda. But this straw that we thought also is for otzer, basically, we're saying no, it has a defect which makes it not for otzer anymore. So basically we did the same thing in the reverse that we did in the first version. Instead of saying that wood is a special high quality wood that Rabbi Shimon would say is usser, now we're saying this is low quality tevin that even Rabbi Yehuda would say is just for burning. Therefore you can use it on Yom Tov. However, the Gemora now has a slight problem. The Gemora says, if you say we're talking about tavna saria, rotting straw, it's very interesting because it's very similar to this week's Parsha, where they start to have this job of making bricks in Mitzrayim. And at one point, when Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron start talking about leaving Mitzrayim, they make it harder for them. They say, we're not even going to give you the straw anymore. You have to go collect that yourself. So now maybe they'll only find rotting straw. Says the Gemora, you know what about rotting straw? It's chazi.
It's
fit. Yeah. For tina.
For tina is like mud.
Yeah. For making into bricks, right? Exactly what it says in the Parsha. So that's what Paro was saying. Let them go collect their own tevin. When they run around trying to collect their own tevin, they're bound to end up with this weird kind of rotting tevin. Fine, that's perfect for bricks. So that's what the Gemora is now saying. How can you say that it's for burning?
What does the tina mean?
Tina's like mud. Rashi says right away. You see, this is another example where Rashi takes the Aramaic word and immediately substitutes a Hebrew word. If you really want to know what a word means, just look at the Rashi's first word. It almost always takes the first word to tell you the Hebrew equivalent. What does he say over here? Latina. Latit. Right away Rashi
Cement.
gives you the Hebrew equivalent.
Cement.
What?
Cement.
No, teat is mud.
Not. Both is bricks.
Seed is cement.
What is it?
Sid.
Oh, sid. Yeah, sid is more plaster.
Whatever. Yeah. Okay, so Rashi right away gives you. Now, what would you do with it?
Geves is plaster. Sorry, Geves.
Okay, whatever. Now, I'm just using the Gemora's terminology. Gemora's terminology would be Sid. Okay. So this for mud. What do you do when you mix straw and mud? Rashi says
Levain, levanim.
levanim. Lilbon levanim. It's a Chumash expression. To make bricks. Okay? Which is exactly at the end of this week's parsha. How do I know? Because I did it yesterday afternoon. Not that I know Chumash so well.
Just today's portion, no?
We started yesterday afternoon.
Oh, sorry.
Start after Mincha. Mincha, you read the beginning of the new parsha.
Yes.
That's when you can start to lunchtime Mincha
I
Ketorah.
told him to you make bricks, go get your own
Yeah.
straw.
You get it, Sruli?
Yep.
So what is the Gemora saying now?
I'm talking about this.
What is the Gemara objecting to now?
Listen, so awesome coming. Shimon doesn't hold a muktzah, right?
Again, we're in the second part of the Gemara,
Rabbi Yehuda.
where we're trying to say the Mishnah is going like Rabbi Yehuda.
Mm-hmm.
What was standing in the way of that? Then why are you allowed
Straw.
to pile up the straw? We're now saying, you know why Rabbi Yehuda will let you pile up the straw on Yom Tov?
Talking about the place where the straw is rotten.
The straw is defective.
Defective.
It's starting to rot. You will not feed it to your animal anymore.
It can only be used for
Burning.
Therefore,
Therefore, since that's the only usage, you can of course use it for that on Yom Tov.
straw that's used for building, you hold it not out of use.
So now the Gemara is saying, but what do you mean? Even if it's starting to rot, it's still good for something else. You said it's only good for burning. That's not true.
It's good for building.
It's good for building. You can look at the end of the Parsha Shemos. It can be made into bricks. Very good for bricks. And if it's very good for bricks, we're again back to square one. How come Rabbi Yehuda lets you pile it up on Yom Tov? You told me if it has some other usage that you would store it away for, he won't let you use it. And fine, it's not good for eating, for behema anymore, so you wouldn't store it for that. But you would still store it away for building, wouldn't you? Like in Mitzrayim, they would store it away to make all their bricks, right? So how come he's letting you use it on Yom Tov again? We're back to square one. Why would, if this is really Rabbi Yehuda, why in the world would he let you use it? We have a rule. Anything that's normally stored away, he won't let you use. Only things that are used for the real thing in front of you, then he'll let you use it.
So you have to turn the page to get the answer?
No, because there's two dots at the end of the page. So it's right there, right in front of us, is the next three words of the answer already.
Talking about the Eastburg.
We're talking about special tevin. This is like the second time we're saying there's a special case here. It's a special case. Special, first of all, that it's rotting. And another special that what? It's also what?
It's thorns.
You can use it for bricks. If it's mukta.
No. Now the final answer. Did you see the final answer? Read the final answer, Shabbatai.
The eat by mukta.
No? Your eyes are playing tricks on you. Go wash your face. Or adjust your glasses. Or take your glasses off, perhaps. I don't know.
I take my glasses off when you see the page.
Oh, okay. Well, then put extra glasses. You want mine to put on for extra?
That's what's written here before the two dots.
No.
There's a
Spell it. Here, I want to hear you spell it.
The eat by.
Yeah, last word. I want to hear you spell the last word.
Oh, kutsi. Oh, kutsi and thorns.
Something clicked.
I thought it was
Your lenses clicked.
See how the mind plays tricks.
Okay, yeah, it happens. Okay, so what are kotsim? That brings us all the way back to the first parsha in the Chumash.
Thorns.
Right? Kotsim v'dardar tatzmiach lach. Hashem promised Adam and Chava, the ground will now produce for you thorns. So if we could talk about a special kind of a straw, that it has what? Thorns. So if it has thorns, what does that do, Sruli? What would you think? Let's see Rashi.
Ein yachol lik. The Eastburg Kotzim has thorns. Ein yachol lik voila.
Legabalo.
Gabla biyado.
No. Legabalo. Just stop there. What's legabalo?
To move it.
No. Legabel. Legabel. It's actually interesting because it sounds like the word gavul. but it's not exactly the word gavul. It's legabel means to knead, to mix together. It's like when you want to make cement, you know what you do? You mix two things together, water and the other stuff, and it makes cement.
Mm-hmm.
So when you want to make bricks, you know what you're supposed to do apparently?
What?
Mix mud and straw. You know how you mix it? Next word? Biyado. Normally you would what? You ever watch your wife make dough? Did your wife ever make dough?
She makes challah, yes.
So you watch her like mix it all together with her hands. Let's say there were thorns in the middle there. What would she say? Go buy challahs. I'm not making challahs this week, right? No one will do that. Can't knead dough if there's thorns in there. Same thing with bricks. Bricks are made the same way apparently. In the old days at least. They would take mud and straw and mix it all together to create like a solid mass, right? The straw holds the mud together into a proper brick, right? At least in the old days. So how does that happen? How do you get straw and mud to mix together so nicely? What's the answer? To mix it all together, like your wife mixes the dough. And if it has thorns in it, no one's going to do that. So therefore, if we say it's talking about a special straw that what? Has thorns, that explains why what?
You could use it. It's why you...
It's not
good for storage.
fit for
Bricks.
making into bricks, right? And if it's not fit for making into bricks, again, the only usage that's left is for burning. So now that gets us back to the original answer, which is that it's a special kind of straw that no one can store it away. They'd only use it for burning. So of course, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree you can use it on Yom Tov for burning. If it's a special kind of straw that only has one usage, and that's for burning, then of course even Rabbi Yehuda, right, would let you use it. He only doesn't let you use something that you normally store away.
So this is smelly straw with thorns in it. That's very special.
Seemingly.
Wow. Uh-huh. Wow.
Now you could say, there are some people who would say, that once we come on to the thing about the thorns, we don't need the answer about the rotting anymore. Right? Would that suffice? If I said it's straw that has thorns, that explains both why I wouldn't store it away for eating, because I don't want my animals to be eating thorny straw, and it also would explain why I'm not going to store it away for bricks. Right? So again, so maybe we don't need to say it's talking about rotting straw anymore. We can just go with this answer to answer both kashas, right? So maybe we don't have to say it's both.
But there's a reason, isn't there?
What?
There must be a reason that they're saying both.
No, that's the point. We said the first one, but we had a problem. Now we're saying another thing that could be not in addition to the first. It could be to replace the first. We could be making a new ukimta, a new status quo for the Mishnah. We thought it must be talking about rotting. That would explain why it's not for behema. But we said it's still a problem. That wouldn't explain everything. So we said it has thorns. That might be enough. Now we don't need to say this is talking about rotting anymore. Now we're like throwing away the first answer and saying, you're right, that doesn't answer the problem properly. But I found a new answer now that does answer everything properly. So that's an all-purpose answer that I can go with that. I don't need to go with the rotting anymore. Okay? I'm not saying for sure. Okay? But Rashi says one other word here. Which means that there's two ways to create mud bricks. Mix it with your hands, or there are some people who rather than mix it with their hands and get their hands dirty, would mix it with their feet, right? Just like some people use their feet to crush grapes for wine, right? You see all these pictures of people stepping on grapes for the wine,
Could
right?
you read that in his hands in the usual way?
Excuse me?
The Baroque love.
It means it's talking about kneading the mud together with this straw to create bricks.
In his usual way, or when
So
he
if there were no thorns,
yeah.
then he would have no reason to do it in an abnormal way. But he's saying because this has thorns, this is now no longer fit for kneading it either way, with your hands or with your feet. Nobody would do it with their hands. No one wants to get their hands all punctured up. And no one would do it with their feet as well. Rashi had to say both because some people make bricks with their hands and some people mix the mud and everything with their feet. So Rashi has to point out that don't tell me that this guy will decide not to use his hands because he knows there's thorns and he'll use his feet. No, even that nobody would do. Even to knead the mud with his feet would not do because it has thorns. The same amount of people who wouldn't do it with their hands also wouldn't do it with their feet.
How would you say if you say that he kneaded with his hands in his usual way?
Sorry?
If he kneaded
You mean ragil?
Yes.
Ragil.
Could
You see Rashi said before the word ragil a few times.
Yes, that's right.
That's ragil. That's ragil.
Ragilov.
This is raglov.
Raglov.
His feet.
Uh-huh.
Be raglov. Be yadav and be raglov. The base makes it with. With an object. You do something with an object.
Yeah.
Right? B'mem malikim. With what do we light candles? Bi yadav. He's going to knead it with his hands. Or bi raglav, with his feet. That base is already pointing me away from the other interpretation which you might want. Besides the fact that there's no yud there. Yud, or Rashi before used the word ragul. Ragul. The second line at the top, the second line from the top, the first word in the line, Rashi used the word ragul. Instead of ragil, which I've never seen this usage before, but Rashi seems to say, second line from the top in the Rashi, use the word ragul. Now either it's a typo, it should really be ragil, or there is such a word, ragul, which I've never heard before, which Rashi wants to say is synonymous with ragil. Either way, that would be the place to either find a yud or a vav and say ragil or ragul, but not raglov is a whole new word. It's the word regal in the plural possessive. Yadav, raglov, einav. Okay, shkoyach.